humans are became a little more humane. Not all of us. Some became quite the opposite because of the of other, all the anti-work going on.
Mm-hmm.
But
Hmm.
we became more considerate. We considered workplace arrangements that we never would have considered. Remote, hybrid, day
Yeah.
off if you're really sick, 5 days off because you got COVID, with pay. So I think we've expanded our hearts with empathy and compassion. And what's come with that too is the word self-care, the notion of wellness. And I think for all of us here today together and those listening, self-care needs to be part of your vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Self-care, wellness, mindset, and mindfulness.
Hey, it's Breaking Barriers, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging podcast. We're here for real talk. We're not afraid to go there. And we want you to come away emboldened and energized to take action and make change.
We believe our diversity, our differences, when joined together by a common set of ideals, makes us stronger.
When I set out to help someone, it is my intention to do just that. I'm not trying to do anything other than meet somebody at their humanity.
Your world has changed, but your dreams shouldn't have to. That's why Kirkwood is your next best step. With affordable, flexible, and close-to-home options, now's a great time to start or finish your Kirkwood degree. Learn more at kirkwood.edu/findyourfuture. Displaced or discouraged at work? Kirkwood can help you learn a new skill or totally reinvent yourself for a brand new career. With so many flexible and affordable options, you can get back on track fast. Learn more at kirkwood.edu/findyourfuture.
What's happening, world? We're back again with another episode of Breaking Barriers, the DEI podcast, brought to you by our 5-star presenting sponsor, Kirkwood Community College, and our civil diversity sponsor, Rise to Greatness, formerly known as PG Cares. Congratulations on the new name change. Rise to Greatness. Thanks for your support.
Mm-hmm.
I'm your co-host, Anthony Arrington. I am joined by my homie, Nick Ford, and my homegirl, Joy Briscoe. Other co-owners, how are y'all?
Hey.
Hey.
Hello, world. Hello, world. I'm excited about you guys know whenever we have the education and equity guest, I'm ready. I'm so ready. I have my questions just ready, jazzed up to go.
Yeah. I think we got somebody has taught me some things in this DEI space, so I'm looking forward to it. Who we got, Nick?
I guess scroll back down to it now. So we have Alfred Ramirez, who we've done some work with in the past as well, and we're excited to talk to today. He's a keynote speaker, coach, trainer, and facilitator for public and private organizations, K-12 schools, universities, and diverse communities. He develops leaders, businesses, diversity and culture change initiatives, and community engagement. Here's my favorite part. He was President Clinton's White House Associate Director of Presidential Personnel. We'll talk about that a little bit today. Senior Advisor, Corporation for National Service, and Executive Director of White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanics, U.S. Department of Education. He served as Columbia University Assistant Director of Admissions and Minority Recruitment, Special Assistant to Mayor Henry Cisneros of San Antonio, Texas. Did I say that right? Cisneros?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Corporate Recruiter, Human Resource Specialist at Transamerica, Managing Director for Inroads Los Angeles. We'll talk a little bit about that too, I think, at least with my questions. And Director of a $2 million Mattel Foundation Initiative for Parents and Communities in Schools. I really want to hear more about that. There's so much stuff we want to hear about.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Ramirez led diversity initiatives at ACT in Iowa, was president of the Greater Quad Cities Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, which we are members of. Corporate Vice President of Government Relations and Diversity for Group O, and Director of Operations of the United States Hispanic Leadership Institute. So many nuggets. A Kellogg Fellow, National Urban Fellow, and a Hispanic Business Magazine's 100 Influential. He attended Columbia University, yes, as an undergraduate. Political Science and Urban Studies in Bernard M. Barrich College. Graduate student in Public Administration. He resides in East Moline, Illinois. Well, he's just over the border. We'll give him some slack. And he's from East Los Angeles. He is a board member of the Moline Foundation, United Way, and Two Rivers YMCA, and a former board member of Goodwill of the Heartlands. And I believe that's no longer former, is it?
No, he's current wife.
You are back, right? Yep. He's back on the board at Goodwill of the Heartlands. So
No, back on the board of the Y.
The Y.
Oh, the Y. The Two Rivers YMCA.
You do too much, Alfred.
Yeah.
So welcome to the show, Alfred, and let's get to it. Let's go.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for creating the space.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Here, I kick it off. I was thinking last night, Alfred, for the listeners, we go way back. Alfred is a journeyman and has done a ton of work in the state of Iowa, and as you can see, abroad. So you've been at this DEI game a long time, Alfred. And my question is, before the surge, I call it the surge, the George Floyd surge, tell us what has changed in your approach to this space pre-George Floyd surge and post-George Floyd surge in terms of how you approach this space as a professional. What are some of the things you've noticed, or what's different in your opinion?
Sure. Well, yeah, that's a great question. My mind's spinning this. It's like, where do I start? So I would say this. If anyone's done this work for a while, or if you're now presently seeking a certificate or self-educating yourself, there's often talk about how the whole field has evolved from a compliance, EEO, affirmative action piece, to a we must hire some more of them piece. To now we need to train them because it's a mess. People they're coming there and they're leaving after 6 months. So now we need to look at some issues here, and so we've had this evolution of what EDI is, equity, diversity, inclusion. Added some more words, belonging and accessibility, etc. And so that's evolved. So as I've been in the field, I guess with the evolution, I'm at a point of revolution. I really think that we're at a place now where people talk about elasticity, where you get stretched and then it goes back. Well, that's not what happens without that elasticity or resilience. There's no going back. Once you get stretched to that point, you're there. Right. And so I fight the inevitable. You're there. So my approach, that's, I'll stop there to catch my breath for a minute. But so that's the evolution. And that's how I've tried to evolve and respond or be ahead of the curve. And now we're at a point where with watching George Floyd murdered live in your living room,
that's right.
The shock, the horror, Emmett Till wasn't enough. This was like the remake, and the latest edition, and so it moved people to literally trip over themselves. We'll do this, we'll do that. We stand for this. There's no place for any of this in this world, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're seeing, a few years later, that those promises are receding. The dollars are receding. EDI folks are being let off, let go. And what happened along that way, though, is I could use certain words. I could use the R word, racism, right after George Floyd. Before it was, oh no, that's too much. Time out. Unconscious bias, but don't say the R word. Or white privilege, the WP word. No, that's too much. That's too much. That's guilting and pushing out. And so what's changed, I think, is we are able to use more vocabulary. We're able to have deeper conversations. But again, when it gets too good, there's a little gentle prodder reminder we're going too far in this. And now we're seeing with anti-woke and CRT, critical race theory, people are saying, time out, that's it, game over. Wait a minute, we have another quarter. Nope, changing the rules. Goodbye.
Yeah, that's what I'm
hearing. I'll catch my breath there.
Yeah.
You got me going. You got me going. Don't get me going.
No, I love that.
That's
what we do. That's definitely what we do. When you said we're not elastic, right? So there's no stretching and going back. And I feel like George Floyd awoken this, like you said, this community sense of we've got to do something, right? And then when the something started to get really uncomfortable because people realized that something was going to do work, people started to say, well, wait, I don't want to feel guilty. And so I was recently having this conversation with a colleague of mine, and I was saying, I have a trans daughter, and I'm being aware of the harms that I myself probably caused my trans daughter because I didn't know. I was ignorant. And that's me as a Black woman having the intersectionality of that, owning my SHIT and saying, even with that, even with me doing the work, I know that I still probably caused some trauma in this process to my trans daughter, and I need to work on that. And having some feelings of guilt about that, but being like, but I should, because those feelings of guilt are going to propel me to do something about it. And I feel like we're currently at this state of, well, nobody wants to feel guilty about anything. And so now we got to revert back. And so from your lens, Alfred, do you feel like that we've really just gone really far the other way? And how do you see that impacting the work that people like you do and that we do at Top Rank? I mean, now it's like, well, no, you can't say too much. If you're at Uber and you have a session called Don't Call Me Karen, you might get fired. You might not have a job the next day. And so what do you think about that, Alfred?
I think that when we look at the history of civil rights, when we look at progress, the minute you stop going forward, you fall back 20 times over. So even in this time, and even in this dangerous time, we can't stop because they can't see that weakness. They can't see that fatigue, that racial fatigue, the racial trauma, the internalized oppression, the internalized trauma, the 1,000 paper cuts. They can't see the hemorrhaging beneath the skin. We need to move forward and move on. And there's no going back for us. Failure is not an option. And what that means is we're going to get bruised a little more than usual. It was okay because it was a comfort zone. And now that people are moving out of that comfort zone, that's where it's getting pretty dangerous. And then there's for every one or two or three detractors, there's the champions. So you have Pepsi getting into a mess, and then you have Target having a whole aisle.
We succeeded because we're woke.
Dealing with these issues, And now, what are they doing? I just saw this morning people, anti-woke, anti-CRT folks, which doesn't exist. There's no such thing as what they're attacking. Right.
Wait, George, what are those? Unicorns and dragons?
Existing doesn't exist. But they're going now in Target and holding up T-shirts and pride slogans and what have you. Say, look what the store is doing. So now they're trying to attack Target.
Which is good.
And Target is saying, so what?
So what?
Bring it.
Yep.
So what?
Yes. I love it when someone brings that up. Joy's like, we don't talk about that because we don't talk about unicorns and dragons either.
Alfred, you have an educational background. So this whole thing where you had parents going to K-12 school boards and talking about CRT. They've never taught CRT in K-12. Right. That is an upper level course. So
it doesn't exist. It's legal in the legal field. And Joy, you and I were talking just before we got on. What we're doing wrong is we don't have our talking points, and we don't have them mass distributed. These folks literally have talking points.
Yes.
When they show up, you can blindfold yourself. You can be any school district where someone's doing this anti-work, and they're reading off the list. Yep. It's this, it's that, it's causing guilt, it's causing trauma to our children. They're being made to feel guilty.
Reverse racism, another term that isn't true.
Doesn't exist. That's not.
Right. We're being blamed for hundreds of years of oppression. It wasn't me. While you still sure are having the privilege from it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I just love that. I'm gonna nerd out on you all a little bit. So. In nuclear power with metallurgy, we do like stress testing, right? Like you stretch it until it breaks.
Tolerance.
And you talk about resiliency and like the rubber band model. I mean, if you stretch things enough, I don't care how flexible it is, it's going to break. And you just see this constant back and forth from one extreme to the other. How about we just leave the rubber band alone and stop stretching it? I mean, wouldn't that be nice?
I don't know. I mean, I think in some areas, I think so. But I think in some areas, you have to stretch it.
Well, yeah, but it needs to be the different people stretching it. It needs to be people who look like me stretching.
Yeah. And
before I lose a thought, Anthony, and I love, because I know you're going to go somewhere good or great. I just thought of something as you were both talking about this and having differences or different viewpoints. I'm looking at, for the first time ever, I'm thinking of it as more as a muscle, building muscle.
Mm-hmm.
When you're literally you tear muscle to grow new muscle on top of other muscle.
I like that.
And so that's, for the first time, I think that is a pretty good metaphor analogy for how we look at this.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I like that you took us there, because it kind of leads me to my other thought, is that this stretching, I like this post George Floyd, and and suddenly everybody's like, oh, that's enough. And we're seeing this more so today than pre-George Floyd. And yes. I ask a lot of my elders about the tension in the country right now around racial justice, particularly and civil rights. And I'd be curious from your perspective. I asked many of my elders who were around during the civil rights era, who were coming of age, maybe they were in their teens and 20s. And I asked them, Alfred, what was it this tense? Because I never thought in our lifetime we would experience this. And to a man, every single one of my elders who have gone through this, black and white, have told me that is it as bad or worse in some cases than it was in the 60s. And now I'm starting to see that in the laws that are being made, and I start going back to the Southern strategy that I think about. Mm-hmm. And the if everybody knows about the Southern strategy for our listeners, is when Nixon, they were caught on tape talking about words they couldn't say to oppress black people. We can't say nigger, nigger, nigger anymore, but now we can say words like busing and economic and welfare, and we can find ways to oppress. And now what we're seeing is laws that are basically
those are dog whistles, right? Dog whistles, right, where you're not saying it out loud, but we know what you're implying.
We know what you're implying. We know what anti-woke is.
It's gone from dog whistle to hurricane warning siren.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's a dog whistle anymore.
Right.
Quick question for you. So on that note, I just saw a few days ago, we have the league, the LULAC, right? The League of United Latin American Citizens, as well as NAACP, have put travel advisories on the state of Florida.
Right.
Yes.
I support that.
It's about time. That's what we're talking about, Alfred. That joint message of we are going to economically impact you if you continue to oppress people in this manner.
That's where
that happened in the Carolinas. When
yes,
they stopped,
you're right.
Events there.
Right.
They pulled out sporting events.
Right.
Yeah.
And I go back and I think about, I think about the busing in the 60s, right, and how the economic impact and how people can have an economic impact, and we can have an impact if we use our voice and our time.
Right. I guess one of the next guests or group of folks I would suggest is someone who puts out the numbers for the economic impact that BIPOC folks contribute to this country, the black and brown and dollar, etc. There's a gross national product there, or domestic product there, and we're seen as taking from the system and not as contributing to the system to the degree that we do. And some of these very and we're also very brand loyal, but that's shifting because you go to where the best quality is for the price. But we're still brand loyal if you think about what people still have in their house, in their cupboards, or and so there is a huge strategy there for that economic boycott. And I'm torn because I was talking to the kids about going to Disney World, and then we talked about we don't want to support that state, but I wanted to support Disney.
Who's fighting.
So where do you go with that? Support them, and then they said, well, no, then we're driving through there. Well, we'll just spend all our money on that site, But that's where it gets tricky too. The unforeseen consequences.
So Alfred, let's talk about that. So you just took me somewhere. Your kids, your relationship with your kids, right, and how you have these conversations about diversity and race relations in the country and what's happening. What are those conversations like with your kids? I just heard you say, you were talking to your kids about not going to Florida because of this. How do those conversations go, and what do they talk about?
Well, there's a few things. I'm getting kind of emotional to the question. How many families do we know have had to have the talk 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years earlier? The talk about how when you leave the door, to look for this, to look for that, the do's and the don'ts. I had to have the talk much earlier in their development. They're 10 and 12 now, and that talk might have been at age 5, or so. So that's one piece. The other is people forget. I think one of the reasons George Floyd had such an impact, it was during COVID. People were home. watching that everything live. My kids were home. They were home for 2 years doing virtual education. So I was assistant teacher for 2 years. And so we had to talk about what they were seeing. I let them watch, and I warned them, and we talked about it. But it's going to come up. They're going to see it, if not now, later. And we had to talk about what was happening on TV, and what that and why is that, and to this day, as they encounter things, we have to talk about it. When I moved into my neighborhood, my wife and I, she's an assistant state's attorney, and I do the work that I do. And one of the neighbors who I blanked out on their faces. If they walked by me, I wouldn't know who they were because I blanked out from rage. They walked by when my son was maybe 3, we had a squirt gun fight in the front yard, and she said loud enough for me to hear as she was walking with her husband. They're walking around the block. Oh, look, they're raising a baby criminal, and it hurt, and I was so astounded that she would have the nerve to say that that I didn't respond, and I still run that through my mind today.
That's deep.
Wow.
And I bet you and your wife are way more credentialed than the people. I love to when people do that, and I'm like, oh,
right.
Or I'm Black and I'm a veteran, and they'll be like, oh, you are? Right. Yes. How many years did you serve? Because I usually cap that.
Yeah.
Except for Nick.
I kick myself for not responding.
You handled that much better than I think I would have.
Yes.
But
that's horrible.
Yeah. And one of the things, it was shocked. Like, did she really say that? And the thing I thought through my mind was, why couldn't it have been somebody was in the service? It was in the services, armed services. Yeah. How about they were in the CIA? How about they were a police person?
Yeah.
A criminal with a water gun?
Wow.
Give me a break.
Yeah, it's interesting. Boy, that's deep, Alfred. I'm glad you shared that because I think some of us have experienced those situations. But what's interesting is I think about the landscape, and we think about the division that we've got in this country, and I don't know about you all, but I look around, and if the division and the numbers are the way they are, when I'm out mowing my lawn, I'm looking up the street, and I'm looking down the street and asking myself, who on this block doesn't like my Black Lives Matter flag? Mm-hmm. Who I think about these things. Who might decide to drive by and shoot up my house today, right?
Or while you're sleeping, which are cowards. They're usually cowards. And
I got to tell you, I did not have those feelings 5 or 10 years ago. And
that's true.
To me, not that I didn't recognize racism and those sorts of things, but I didn't have that feeling of being really like physically unsafe and thinking about those things. So I'm constantly watching my surroundings, and I hope I don't have a neighbor like yours, Alfred. I don't know if I do, but chances are I do. Yeah. Chances are really high that I do.
Yeah.
I've left places before. I've left places if someone comes in there that just seems a little too aggressive, and they're just bothered by my presence, right? Like I haven't really, there's nothing that I've done. There's nothing that I said, just the fact that I'm there. Because I do think we don't talk about racism existed prior to Trump. Mm-hmm. It did, right?
Absolutely.
But he was a battery in the back for many people to normalize their racist actions and behavior. Yes. And so now, oftentimes when I'm walking, there's these people in these big old semi trucks that as soon as they see me, they rev their engine, because now I ignore them and I just assume that they're compensating for that big truck and that big rev because there's not big things in other places. Mm-hmm. So when you walk, if you see joy, no, that's what I think.
Right. Little brains.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And so that's what I think. But before I didn't feel like you said, Anthony, like, oh, I'm going to have a mace. I'm going to have something to defend myself on me at any time, because now you literally are in places where you're like, is this the moment where because of my skin, someone decides I don't deserve to be on earth anymore?
Right. And it makes
us
heavy. It makes us kind of have to heighten. I don't know how you feel, Alfred or Nick. It makes us kind of have to heighten our own biases, right? To your point, Joe. Right. Normally, somebody riding by in a truck, revving their engine, you think they're just revving because of their engine. But now these other things might be going through your head. Are they going to come back around the corner and, we have to really manage our biases, and it's so important today to do that. And it's difficult.
Yeah,
we talked about it once.
LA.
Yep.
What's that?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Alfred.
I was saying, I grew up in East LA, and the gang house was in the corner, and so all through high school, 12 years of school, I walked up and down the streets and every day it was, when are you going to join us? Well, you're too good for us. And I grew up with them. We'd play football, tackle, and push each other around. And so it was good-heartedness, but it's like, when are you going to join? I was the oldest of 5. I knew that if I joined, everyone in my family would join. Yeah. And then the gang house, there was 3 or 4 generations of gang members. And so and when I would go to the bus stop, any car that slowed down, I was looking for a potential drive-by. So I was there was tension just waiting to get on the bus. And then when I got on the bus to go to school, because I went to a Catholic school, I had to go through about 3 other school districts, and about 6 other gangs would get on and off the bus. So my day was trauma before I even got to school, before 8 a.m. Or 7:45. And then I got caught a few times for driving while brown, nothing wrong. And so I thought those days were behind as I began to become more upwardly mobile, move to different cities and towns. It's almost seemed like there was a lull because I was protected by my environments. And now no environment is safe. Right. There's hostility in the workplace. There's hostility in the supermarket. People getting gunned down shopping. And I mean, so when we think about where is that safe space anymore, churches and the synagogues and temples, those were off limits. Even if you were the craziest of crazies, you would not go into a place of worship and do what you do now. So the boundaries are gone, and the rules of even sick behavior, where there was a little temperance, are gone, and it's not that they're very safe. But I wanted to jump there real quick to jump on something you all have risen to the surface for me, and that's that when you ask about my kids and me having to have the talk with them, I think what we need to do, and this is for everyone listening, is think about how we're equipping our kids to respond. Not to meet aggression with aggression, but how are we teaching them to respond? Many times their peers are just repeating. Sometimes they don't know what they say, and then sometimes they very well do.
Parrot
and
mentality.
So how are we teaching them to say, ouch, that hurt? Do you know why that hurt? Do you really understand what you just did or said? Or we better talk about this later. I don't want to talk about this right now. I've got to cool down. We're I think at a younger age, and there's some great books out there, how to be an anti-racist for kids, etc. But we really need to think about what's in our library right now, and even at the earliest of ages, to equip our children, even when a teacher treats them in a manner based on their race or their ethnicity. So how do they respond to say politely, "Teacher, that really hurt what you just did or said"?
Well, it's funny you say they're in books. Unless you're in Florida, apparently, then those books might not be available.
Well, I was good.
Right. So what you do is you go to that fire sale.
Here too.
You go to that fire sale and get the book before they burn it.
Yeah, here in North Florida too.
Well, let me play devil's advocate and ask that question, Alfred, or to Nick, any of y'all. Because I first of all, preface this by I agree 1,000%. But, geez, Alfred, you sound like you're indoctrinating your kids. Are you
to be human? Are you indoctrinating? Are you indoctrinating them to be a human?
You know what? You just gave me a good comeback. I'm immunizing them.
Yes,
I like that.
Right.
Now the anti-vaxxers are going to be after you, but yes.
Right. You're immunizing. When I always hear that word indoctrinate, and I wonder what you do. What is? I guess I don't even know what Webster's dictionary says about the word indoctrinating, but it's just in negative connotation. I guess if you want to say I'm indoctrinating my kid, if I'm indoctrinating kids to be good humans, okay. Whatever word you want to use, but I like that we're immunizing our kids, because many would say that the way you just described how I would like to teach and educate my kids, many who don't agree with you might say that you're indoctrinating them, that this anti-wokeness.
What are you indoctrinating them to? Yeah. I've always just wanted us, because there's this, again, Alfred, like when we talked about we haven't done a good job of having a concise message.
Yeah.
If they say this is your response. Like, we are indoctrinating them to be human and to teach to be respectful of people that may be different of you. And when you give it that language, it's hard to argue with that as language. Who's going to say, well, no, you shouldn't teach them to be human and they shouldn't be nice to people that are different than you? But we don't sometimes, especially when I think about political parties and different things of that nature, we don't always take the time to simplify what we're saying so that anybody can get behind it and say, yeah, maybe I don't agree with you, but I respect your right to be different than me.
Joy, do you think we need to take? Go ahead, Alfred.
I was going to say, Joy, you just inspired me. It's not enough to be human. We must be humane.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Joy brought up the P word. So I want to go there. I want to talk about your time in D.C. Working for the presidential office, and tell us about your experience there and kind of how you got into that and how that flowed and during that time.
Yeah, and people need to know this. I never grew up thinking I was going to go from East LA to the White House. That was not in my vocabulary or even in my dreams.
Sounds like a movie.
It really comes down to relationships and being and positioning yourself in the right spot to seek an opportunity when you're faced with it. In working with Henry Cisneros, he joined the Clinton campaign when he was like 20 people back. He was not even in the front runner position. And living in San Antonio, they came through Texas. So I was the point person between Henry Cisneros and the Clinton campaign when they wanted Henry to do surrogate speaking, or when they wanted us to get the messaging out in Texas. And we had a wonderful situation that Ann Richards was the governor at the time, Democratic governor.
I remember Ann.
And so we were working that hard. And then so when the election occurred and he was elected president, I had gone back to LA because that was during the Rodney King uprising. And I wanted to go back home and help in that situation. Henry and I went out there in the middle of the night. Mayor Bradley at the time, who's passed away, African-American mayor of LA, asked him to come out and help keep Latinos and other people of color home and not get out in the streets. And so we were up and down the streets and just trying to do that and going from radio station to TV station. So I stayed home. I got asked twice to go to Washington, D.C. to work for the Clinton administration. And I said, no, I'm back home and I'm trying to get literally the ashes. The alley had burned and it was still simmering and smoldering. And finally, the third time, they said, we really want you to come out. The position is in the White House doing presidential personnel, hiring people for the administration. And at that point, I was replacing someone. And at that point, I said yes, because I saw it had been months into it. And I saw what President Clinton was doing policy-wise and who he was hiring. He was hiring some of the best minds in the country, in the world, to head these cabinets, not some of the doofuses that were during the other administration that just passed. I won't even give them a name. So that's how I got there. And then I kept being asked to go from one post to the next to do startup. It had been 12 years since there had been a Democratic president. And so I went from there to National Service, which is the America programs and the Senior Vista programs. And then they asked me to go help start up the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence over at the Department of Ed. So it was relationships. It was training myself to being in the spot to take on that opportunity and choosing wisely, not going for the glimmer and the glamour. I said no twice. And the third time I thought this is where I could make a difference. And I chose it and went off to DC.
So through that is an amazing story, from East LA to the White House. I love that. I love to have to get a quote.
Some comedians used to say it's from the outhouse to the White House.
I'm about to put that on a shirt. Alfred, as you look back on your career and your history and in today's times, how do you feel that has shaped you as a man and the person you do? How have these experiences shaped who you are today?
I think we need to be humble, but not to a fault, not to where we're seen as subservient or as servants. There's a difference between doing public service and being a servant. Well, I think one of the things that's I constantly I don't have to remind myself. I'm the beneficiary of mentors, the beneficiary of someone who told me I could do it, and that one person was going against 10 who said I couldn't. So it was always an upstream swim, but I've always benefited from that. And programs, I was in Upward Bound. I'm a TRIO program graduate, Upward Bound. 3 years going to community college campus while in high school, learning about college and getting even some simple things that people don't realize this. I want you all to hear this audience. It costs money to apply to college, just to apply.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
A lot of cases,
Okay.
yeah.
And then your tests, your standardized tests, it costs money to take the test and to send them to schools. I couldn't afford the application or the fees, but through Upward Bound, they helped me pay for it. My counselor in high school bet dinner against me to my math teacher in my senior year that I would flunk out of Columbia either by September or by December.
Wow.
And when I went home in December,
Wow.
we had dinner, and I saved up my money because I wanted to pay her for dinner because she had been so good to me and supportive. And she started crying when I handed her the money. She says, no, this is on Mr. Taylor. He's paying for this. And I got a big grin. I said, that's fantastic. That's great. She said, no. She started crying even more. And I said, why are you crying? She says, he bet me dinner that you were going to fail. And I won the bet.
Oh, no.
Wow.
And I started crying. I felt so betrayed. And I just couldn't believe this is the counselor.
Yeah.
But they still have that.
And nobody had left to go out of state or out of the country. I mean, further away. There were only 3 people who left my year. One got Joe Baker got a scholarship to West Point to run cross country. He was a 4.0 student, and my other friend joined the brotherhood or the priesthood, and then I went off to Columbia. Instead of being proud of that, he took credit for it, but he was betting against me.
3 out of how many, Alfred? 3 out of how many?
3 out of my class was a small 720 for my graduating class.
He said his class was small at 720.
Yeah. Right. So,
but I thought my class was big at 330.
There you go. But so you're on here, irony. So I graduated Columbia. I thought I was going to be either a civil rights lawyer, social worker, or teacher. I became none of those, but now I do all of that.
You do them all,
right.
Say,
right.
Yeah.
But I became an admissions officer. They had me recruiting East LA when I was a freshman. They flew me back each year to recruit students in the Barrio and South Central. And so after 4 years, they knew me and they said, "Would you like to be an admissions officer? We want to hire you. You're bringing students here." So the irony is, as an admissions officer, I was also a faculty advisor. So I had access to the records for my students. I also I had access to my own records, and I saw the recommendation that my counselor wrote, and it was one of the most lukewarm. I really don't want to write this, but he asked me to write it. Kind of recommendations I've ever read.
Wow.
And this is the same counselor that bet against you.
Right. So I read what he wrote 4 years later. Normally, you would never have that access.
This is why it is so important for us in this space, and I'm sure that we all feel that way on this call, is that we are involved with our kids and our education, because there are people in our systems who don't have our best interests at heart. And we have to be able to smile
in
your face. Smile in your face.
And give you the lip service and the rah and
right.
And they're doing everything but.
So how do we stay, as we kind of wrap up, what advice do you have for how we all stay motivated in this space, Alfred? What keeps you motivated, and what advice would you give to others doing this work, or others who want to work with people like us doing this work? How do you keep them motivated when the arrows keep coming?
So we're reading a lot about this, and I think a lot has been discussed.
I'll say inspired too, not motivated. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think post George Floyd and COVID, we as humans became a little more humane. Not all of us. Some became quite the opposite because of other, all the anti-work going on. But we became more considerate. We considered workplace arrangements that we never would have considered. Remote, hybrid, day off if you're really sick, 5 days off because you got COVID. with pay. So I think we've expanded our hearts with empathy and compassion. And what's come with that too is the word self-care, the notion of wellness. And I think for all of us here today together and those listening, self-care needs to be part of your vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Self-care, wellness, mindset, and mindfulness. Put those 4 words there. Self-care, mindfulness, mindset, and wellness. And so in answer to your question, we need to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
We need to take care of ourselves. And remember this, just when it's getting hot in here, as the song would say, it's getting hot in here.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we're doing our best work.
Yeah.
Because we're getting a rise out of folks.
Yeah.
So just when the heat is on and just when the pressure is on and just when we're being pushed back against the wall, we have to actually laugh in the face of that and say, I'm doing it right.
The pushback is because we're doing it right. Yeah.
Right. Because you're pushing me back because you're just afraid at this point. So we
Right.
and the other thing is in communities of color among BIPOC folks, we don't ask for help enough. And mental health, month, mental health month every year, we talk about that. And what's really frightening is if we look at the statistics for BIPOC suicides and teenage suicides, it's horrendous.
Yeah.
And we need to learn how to detect the signs, and also ask what environment our loved ones are in, and how are we a contributor to that, or how can we help make it better?
Yeah.
So that's what I would say for where we're at now and how we need to care for each other. Don't stop fighting, because then you stop living.
I like that. When the fire's just getting going, that's when it's time to, you're doing something. When there's making noise. I think I heard somebody say, if I'm not, or maybe I heard you say it, Joy, but Penny, if you're not criticizing me, if you're criticizing me, I must be doing something right.
Yeah.
Joy, I think you have a listener question today for us.
I did. And I know we were kind of coming to the end, but Nancy from Sioux City had a question about what are your thoughts about the current legislation and its potential impact on public schools? And I believe she's referring to our governor in Iowa. She just made it where you can enroll in the school of your choice. So you can take your money and enroll in private schools. And how do you feel about that? We've heard both on our show. We've heard people that were big supporters of being able to potentially go to charter schools. And we've heard people that are like, no, most of our kids are going to be in public education. They don't have the access to that. So we need to make sure we're investing in making sure we have strong public educational systems. And so, Alfred, from your lens, both as a policymaker, both as a practitioner, how do you feel about that?
So I'm going to say this out loud and not just think it. Be real and be honest and be transparent and stop lying.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is there's a thing throughout life, there's intent and there's impact.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then there's also unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But in these instances, there are intended consequences. When you begin to draw out of the bank from those public schools the funding and allow people to shift it elsewhere, you're literally drawing down the account. And so that means kids who can afford to go to a school of their choice, to even travel to a school of their choice, or afford the other piece of what it takes to go to that school, are left behind.
Mm-hmm.
They're left where they are, and they don't have a choice. And so what you see, too, is why is this legislation being pushed? What's happening in the schools? Are we achieving to the point where now maybe we need to move the goalpost 10 yards back and give the money elsewhere? What's really happening too, I think, is you used the word indoctrination earlier, Anthony. Mm-hmm. We don't like what's being taught in schools right now. There is some public ability to teach certain things, and we're trying to close that out. But let's go elsewhere. Let's take our ball and go to another court and do exactly what we want, when we want, and how we want, and discriminate while we're at it. And so I think there's an ugly undercurrent here. And all I have to say is be honest, be transparent, and say what you really mean.
And don't lie.
And that is that you're mean.
You know, Alfred, it's funny. I've had people say, well, why don't like we just start our own school that's a charter school, but for what we believe in. Except we've also talked to people that for funding like that, it's hard to get. The state will disapprove it. We saw this in a function we did at Waterloo about daycare, right? This is the daycare money. And it was great if you were a white person applying for it. If you were the black person applying for it, it wasn't so great. And, you know, so again, there's that realization that, you know, we talk about this all the time, that it's great. It's easy for me to go do it. Not as easy for Anthony to go do it because of my privilege. And I just don't understand how people don't understand that personally, but it's there.
That's why we're here.
And that's why we're here.
I would ask people in Iowa, and I know we're coming to a close, I would ask people in Iowa, all people, to look at any piece of legislature and the consequences on all involved, not just you and how it benefits you. I'm really upset not only about this piece, but lowering the age limit to work. And then to be put into unsafe environments, to be cleaning around blades in a meat factory at age 40 or 15 or 60. Give me a break.
Right.
Yeah.
How convenient.
We have employees here. We have adult employees. There's plenty of us in this state. We don't need to.
And Alfred, at the next show, we're going to dive into that. They would rather create child labor than admit that the real issue that with the talent shortage, they just needed to lean into immigration.
Exactly.
All the people that really study in that are like, well, no, we should be leaning into that because it's more workforce. But rather than that, we're gonna have child labor rather than actually have to go away from this ugly campaign that we've had. That's a war on immigrants coming to a country that was founded on immigration.
It's children of it's children of color and it's poor children that are they're getting hurt in those work.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, Alfred, you kind of took us there. As we close, we were going to say, is there, you know, we like to ask our guests, is there anything else on your mind that we haven't talked about that you want our listeners to know, a nugget they could take away? And you keep giving away nuggets, so but I'll still ask you, anything else you would like to tell our listeners, man?
I'd say this: it's a challenge. I'm challenging every listener to ask yourself, what do you need to learn, and what do you need to unlearn? And are you an ally or an activist ally?
Mm-hmm.
Are you taking? Are you really? And don't time how you become an ally. If you're in the room and someone's being abused, then speak up then and there.
Yeah.
Or put a stop to the carnage. Don't go out in the hallway and say, "Boy, that was brutal. Are you okay?"
Yeah.
No, I'm not. When were you when I needed you?
Don't send you that FaceTime message on the background, right? That Facebook message in the background that tells you how they feel.
Right. So be an activist ally. Be an anti-racist. Be anti, which means you take action against, not just say what you are or aren't. And also learn and unlearn. And do the work. All of us of any background, BIPOC folks plus, do the work. Educate ourselves about other cultures, and other ways of being, and then ask the questions. Don't tax somebody to educate you if you haven't at least done some of the work.
Yeah.
Don't make someone that's a lived experience to be your Google.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And ask them to relive the trauma.
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
that's the last thing too. Last thing too. Real quick.
Yeah.
Drama is it's not drama, it's trauma. When a child acts out, there's more going on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So don't punish them, don't expel them, don't suspend them. And many times BIPOC folks, more so than anyone else, find out what is going on.
The why.
Because that's a cry for help.
Yes. We talk about
the drama it's not drama, it's trauma.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes, we talk about the 5 whys a lot. Dig, and find out, because there's a reason why the kid's angry. So very, very enlightening, Alfred. Man, thank you so much for your wisdom, your words, and we appreciate it. This has been a great session. Nick, you want to take us out here and
again, like most of our sessions, we could talk all day on some of these topics, and maybe there'll be a part 2 in the future.
And shame on all of you. Now you got me all riled up.
Yes, we love it.
Leave your charge.
I'm gonna have to go get
There goes the blood pressure.
I'm gonna have to get into some good trouble now.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
All right.
So a big shout out to our 5-star presenting sponsor, Kirkwood Community College.
Yeah.
We appreciate your partnership on the
Hey,
podcast.
Kirkwood, I love that institution.
Yes. Shout out to Kirkwood.
Also, a big thanks to our silver diversity sponsor, Rise to Greatness, formerly known as PG Cares. We also want to give thanks to our friends at Breaking Barrier supporters, Community Savings Bank, and Tyler Lincoln Barnes DDS. We'd love to hear from you. Hit us up and send your questions, comments, suggestions to our new website, info@toprankculture.com. Info at Top Rank Talent Solutions still work as well, but send them to info@toprankculture.com.
Absolutely. Special thanks to our listeners out there. We couldn't do this without you, so appreciate our listeners, and continue to subscribe, review, rate us, share, because we're putting good stuff out here. We want people to hear these messages from these great guests, these real conversations. So thank you so much.
And all of those sponsors, thank you. Thank you.
Definitely.
For your support.
Yes.
Yes.
And you listeners, thank you.
Yeah.
Bring others to this place.
Love it, Alfred. We drop episodes twice per month on your favorite audio platforms and YouTube. Search Breaking Barriers, DEIMB podcast. Thanks again, much as Alfred, our guest today, said. We do appreciate our sponsors so much because you are showing with your action, your words, and your support that you understand the need for this work and you're investing in it. And so we hope you enjoyed the conversation. And this week, go continue to break some barriers and get into some good trouble.
Yeah,
Have a great one, everyone.
Yep, break some barriers.
Take care.
Advancing equity is not a one-year project. It's a generational commitment.
There are too few people in the world willing to be the domino, too few people willing to take that fall.